Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. Those of you who are knowledgeable about music, and more specifically, are knowledgeable about pop music history, might be scratching your head as to the title of this episode. After all, it's a solid consensus that Curtis Mayfield is one of the true, genuine titans of R&B, soul, funk music of the 1960s and 70s. Singer extraordinaire, songwriter extraordinaire, producer extraordinaire, guitarist extraordinaire. His music bridged the gap between the sweet, sophisticated soul and R&B of the likes of Marvin Gaye and Aretha Franklin, and the driving hard funk of the likes of James Brown and George Clinton. Lyrically, he was way ahead of his peers in addressing socio-political issues such as civil rights, poverty, crime in the inner cities, war, and political corruption. And more impressively, doing so with an emotional earnestness and a positivity that was as moving and inspirational as his gorgeous falsetto voice. Yet, consider this. Back in 2019, renowned British music journalist Chris Needs published a two-part retrospective on all the music that came out in the year 1969, called Just a Shot Away. In it, he goes off on a tangent about Mayfield and how he wanted to write a comprehensive biography of the man, pitching the idea to various publishers. What was the response? No one wanted to do it. Not a single one. Why? Because they felt there wasn't enough interest. I myself worked in the publishing business for several years before I changed careers, and I can tell you that book publishers are very canny about how they gauge the market for a prospective book. If they say there's no interest, there's no interest. Which brings us to a bigger, more troubling issue. Why is there no interest? There are tons of books out there about Marvin Gaye, James Brown, Stevie Wonder, and Michael Jackson, and Prince. How can there be no interest in Mayfield, an artist whose best work at least stands alongside the best work of all those R&B, soul, funk legends I mentioned earlier? As someone who's in music media, I can tell you with certainty that among younger generations of critics, artists, and fans, Mayfield is not as revered or even remembered as fondly as the Gays, the Browns, the Franklins, and the Wonders of the world. And that is absolute fucking bullshit. I will go to my grave believing Mayfield is a superior artist in every single category to Marvin Gaye and was every bit as musically prodigious as Stevie Wonder. And you know what? More people should think so. If they don't, it's because they haven't heard the man's music, pure and simple. Especially now, in the social, cultural, and political climate we live in, Mayfield's music should resonate with a soaring, searing clarity that grips your heart, stirs your soul, and frees your mind. Music media in general has failed in not properly curating this man's music and putting it on the pedestal that it so clearly deserves. And we, at the Curmudgeon Rock Report, are here to rectify this injustice. Welcome to your much-needed education in the genius of Curtis Mayfield, and welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report. So, after that fiery parameter setter, you, the listener, might be expecting us to dive right into Curtis Mayfield and just basically proselytizing on how great he is. And we are going to do that. But folks, we try hard not to be a dad rock podcast, even though we kind of are. But we do our best to push against that. So we really like to talk about new music. But while I say that, I hear a noise. What's that noise, Chris?
Yeah, what is that noise? By the way, we're more like granddad rock at this point, but what is that noise? Is it a satellite? Is it is it Havana syndrome? No, actually, it's us entering the parallel universe. That's the rip in the space-time continuum, and we're going over to the other world where rock and roll was still predominant and still the thing, man. Where people still light the lighters in the arenas, and they still wear the jean jackets, and they still wear they still wear the mullets and earrings, and they still have the attitudes. And like going to a Kiss concert on a Friday night was everything out in the small towns. Yep, folks. In a parallel universe, rock and roll never did die and never did go the way of jazz, and it's still the thing. And that's our way of saying that this is a segment where we like to cover new and newish artists that we think are really great, and in that parallel universe might actually have a chance to sell records and make some money and actually move physical units. Yeah, that's the thing. There's such a thing as physical media in the parallel universe too. Yeah, even though
it exists in ours too. It's just a niche market in the form of vinyl.
Yeah, exactly. But in the parallel universe, you can still buy a CD for $19 for two songs you like, and so artists can still make money. So. That said, Arturo, what album and what artist are you covering on this episode's version of the Parallel Universe?
Yes. Hailing from New Zealand, Nadia Reid has been around for about a decade with her brand of emotionally heart-wrenching folk music and soft rock. Her critical breakthrough, at least in the UK and Europe, came in 2017 with her beautiful album Preservation. In 2020, she solidified a reputation as a premier singer-songwriter with the generally more up-tempo folk rock of Out of My Province. It's been 5 years since that record came out, and there have been some changes in her life. She now lives in the UK, and she's settled down with her partner and had 2 children in the meantime. Her latest album, Enter Now Brightness, that's the new one, is drenched in the glow of domestic bliss that has come with her life changes. I'm usually dismissive of music like this, but a few things make Reid stand out. First, she has a startlingly gorgeous voice that can melt any cynic's heart. And she has a way with a twisty, winding melody that can worm its way into your ear. Second, on this album especially, the domestic bliss I mentioned earlier isn't of the soppy, sentimental kind. Throughout the whole album, there's a sense of subtle dread, as if the bad times are over, but the negative effects of those bad times still linger. There are also a couple of songs such as Hotel Santa Cruz and Even Now, where she reminisces on previous relationships and life experiences, as if there's a part of her that possibly regrets settling down. Third, again pertaining to this album, her music is mutated into an interesting strand of indie pop. The booming drums, the prickling synthesizers, and the washed-over guitars of Changed Unchained sound like 1980s Kate Bush. The mid-tempo groove of Hold It Up has tinges and flourishes of psychedelia. Woman Apart harkens back to her earlier folk rock sound, but does so with an expansive lushness that's really impressive. Overall, it's a welcome departure and a very solid album. 4 out of 5 stars. Chris?
Yeah, I like this album too, and I agree with you. I think that Ms. Reid has a very, very pretty voice, and she can do a lot with it. She does subtle little things with her vocal inflections to add real pathos to her melodies and to her songs, and just sort of to spell out certain lyrics. The older I get, the more I appreciate this kind of mature folk rock / jazz rock hybrid.
Right.
And I say jazz rock only because it does have that sort of poppy torch song kind of feel to it. I mean, I liken it. Some of it reminds me of early Jay Bennett era Wilco, and some of it reminds me of Norah Jones. And so maybe it's like a splice of those artists. So I was not familiar with Ms. Reid, or Nadia Reid, until now. So thank you for turning me on to her.
Welcome.
And I will say, I think the best song on the album is the first song, actually. Emmanuel is very good. And I've been vibing on that in preparation for this episode. So good pick. And this year's off to a pretty strong start. I got to admit, as far as this kind of singer-songwritery kind of thing, like I did the Weather Station a couple months back, and you've done some good albums too. So, obviously, nothing quite like Cabrini Girls. Yeah.
Lambrini girls, baby.
Lambrini girls,
Yeah.
Cabrini Green, Lambrini girls. Yeah, what are you gonna do? Hey, this is a Curtis Mayfield episode. He grew up in Cabrini Green in Chicago,
There you go.
so
Easy to make that mistake.
that's why Cabrini's on my mind, boy, baby. So anyway, so speaking of strong albums in the beginning of this year, like I said, we're not even halfway through March, and we've got some candidates that have come out that may end up finding the light of day on my favorite albums or singles of the year, including this one. This is a new album from an indie rock trio from Chicago named Horsegirl, and their new album Phonetics On and On. And so let's talk a little bit about Horsegirl and about this record. Chicago natives Horsegirl formed their trio while they were still young high schoolers. In interviews, its members have named Sonic Youth, Stereo Lab, My Bloody Valentine, Yo La Tango, and bands signed to the 1980s and 90s New Zealand label Flying Nun as influences. From listening to their output, it's obvious that REM, Pavement, Smashing Pumpkins, and the Curmudgeons' resident favorite band Built to Spill are also obvious influences. Quote, our guiding voice, I would say, is that we want to be as punk-minded as possible, end quote, guitarist Penelope Lowenstein said in an interview back in 2021. Quote, I'm not saying that this is just a punk thing, but everything we do has kind of a layer of bullshit, end quote. It's a great musical vocabulary and an ethos for these young ladies to have, as they demonstrate on their second LP, the cleverly named Phonetics On and On, which was released in February. Indie it girl Kate LeBon produced this album, and her influence is apparent as these songs are lean and spare, but also mean and muscular. The band under LeBon's tutelage proves it can craft shimmering doo-doo-doo da-da-da-da-da worthy pop hooks as well. This is a neat little orthodox indie rock album worthy of your attention. Highlights include the jangly punk pop gem Switch Over, the gentle acoustic ditty Frontrunner, which is a sweet paean to Young Romance and an early candidate for my short list of favorite songs of 2025, and two songs that Built to Spill is probably jealous it didn't write. The subtly stomping yet dreamy Sport Meets Sound, and the pure waltzy ode to 90s indie rock innocence 2468, as raggedy as it is delightful. Lowenstein and bandmate Nora Chang are now students at New York University, and their transition from high school precociousness to starter kit collegiate maturity is evident on Phonetics On and On, which follows up an equally excellent debut album, 2022's noisier, less refined versions of modern performance. I'll give Pitchfork, got to give Pitchfork its due. Their reviews these days have gotten a lot better. I'll give Pitchfork the last word on this album, as this actually does the new album justice. Quote, versions came out a little under 3 years ago, aeons in the eyes of a teenager. Nowadays, Horsegirl undermined it respectfully as our high school record, without overlooking its role as a springboard. Back then, the trio had something to prove. Teenage girls are loud and powerful and defy categorization. But phonetics represents a more internal, more subtle process. Accumulating experiences as a young adult is about applying pressure and seeing what gives under your weight. Here, Horsegirl learned how dazzling it is to instead pull back and feel the invisible touch of what was once there, a fizzy tingling on the palms and cushion of silence around the ears. That growth is the most memorable part of Horsegirl's new album. All three members decompress and breathe deeply, locating clarity within the stillness of their songs and selves. Good young band, Arturo.
Yeah, kind of good. I mean, I really wanted to like this record, but I came away a bit disappointed with their first album from 3 years ago, which was pretty good. I thought it was all right, but they were still in high school, and they were very, very, very indebted to their late 1980s, early 1980s
Yeah.
alternative rock influences.
Oh, no
Sonic
doubt.
Youth, My Bloody Valentine, and all that stuff. But you can forgive them; they were high school kids. So my line on them was, you know what? Wait until they get a little older, get a little more mature, and develop their own sound. Let's see what happens. Well, with this album, what they did is that they went from being completely derivative of one style of music to being derivative of another. And what some people have called growth, I call just changing their influences, but still wearing it really, really much on your sleeves.
Yeah,
Instead of
that's
like
true.
late 80s, early 90s alt rock, it's now mid 1980s UK indie jangle pop. And a lot of the songs to me are very monotonous and same sounding. And they lack the guts for the most part of the first album. However, the two singles from this record, unsurprisingly, are really, really good. 2468 and Switch Over, which leads me to believe that maybe, okay, maybe there's something that can sustain this band, at least as far as I'm concerned, for the future. But I really wish they would just like merge their influences into something a little more unique and a little more significant than just copying their influences and just having the whole record sound the same, which for the most part, which it kind of does to me. It's a band I really, really was looking forward to their second album to seeing how they're matured. But instead of a maturity, it just was a lateral movement from one set of influences to another without really anything making it truly their own, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's how I, even though, hey, the two singles are awesome. 2468 is one of the best singles of the year. And I like Switch Over a lot. Like you said, it's a great pop
Yeah, and
music.
I like Front Runner too, which
You know,
they actually also released as a standalone
hmm.
track on Spotify and on the streaming services. So I guess that counts as a single. But Front Runner, it's more of an acoustic number, and it's kind of their love song.
Hmm.
And if anything, that's probably the most original thing that they've done. And to me, what you were calling same sounding, I call it unified. I
Yeah.
think that there's a unified sound that they come up with Kate LeBon, and you got to remember, these girls are still really young. They're wearing their influences on their sleeves, and so, like you said, they're swapping out influences. But give this band a little more. You got to remember, they're still 19-year-old sophomores or
Well,
20.
get back to, well, then in that case, get back to me when they're 25.
Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock.
Curtis Mayfield. I'm in agreement with Arturo that he is one of the most underrated and underappreciated artists of all time. Certainly one of the more undermarked artists of the 70s. His solo output, not quite Al Green's, but then again, nobody's is. But he had himself one hell of a run between 1970 and 1976 as a solo artist, and he had himself a hell of a run in the 60s with his band The Impressions. Mayfield just he had this gentleness to him, but also, but it was, the meekness. When we think of meekness, it's gotten a negative connotation, but in the Bible and in religious speak, meekness is a term for gentle strength. So the idea is that you're not being demonstrative. You're just kind of taking it in stride, and you're just kind of you glide through with a dignity. And I think that in terms of that kind of meekness, Mayfield was incredible because he spoke softly, but boy did he say a lot. And boy, did he say a lot well. And so, Arturo, I'm going to kick it over to you. Tell us a little bit about Mr. Mayfield and how he got his start in his hometown of Chicago, Illinois.
Right. Yeah, Curtis Mayfield was born in 1942 in Chicago as one of five children. His father left the family when he was 5 years old, and he, his siblings, his mother, and maternal grandmother moved from one Chicago housing project to another until they settled in the Cabrini Green housing project when Curtis was a teenager. He eventually dropped out of high school after his sophomore year, but even at a very young age, his saving grace was his natural gift for music. As a young child, his mother taught him piano, and he quickly developed a love of gospel music. At the age of 7, he was already singing publicly at the church his aunt attended. He started playing guitar at the age of 10 and, being self taught, quickly became very proficient at it, claiming blues legend Muddy Waters and Spanish classical guitar maestro Andres Segovia as early influences. When he was 14, he formed his first group, a gospel a cappella group called the Alpha Tones. That group didn't last long, and very soon after he joined his friend Jerry Butler's group, which went by the name of the Roosters. In 1958, the Roosters changed their name to the Impressions and solidified as a vocal quintet with Mayfield, Butler, Sam Gooden, and Richard and Arthur Brooks. From the very beginning, the 16-year-old Mayfield established himself as the group's primary songwriter, and for the first couple of years of their existence, they recorded for VJ Records, an African-American owned indie label based in, of course, Chicago. They scored a huge hit in 1958 with the Mayfield penned ballad For Your Precious Love, which went to number 3 on the R&B chart and as high as number 11 on the Billboard Pop chart. Butler left the group in 1960 and was replaced by Fred Cash. At this point, the Impressions signed a major label deal with ABC. Yes, the same company that gave us the ABC television network, and rewarded ABC with another Mayfield penned hit in 1961 called Gypsy Woman. The Latin-tinged R&B number went to number 2 on the R&B chart and number 20 on the pop chart. In 1962, the Brooks brothers left the group, and the Impressions consolidated as a trio with Mayfield, Gooden, and Cash. Ironically, the paring down of the group set off their most successful period with a string of hits and songs that several other artists would cover. But before we go into what we deem to be the 10 greatest, most essential Impressions songs, any thoughts, Chris?
Yeah, the one thought I can give is that it's interesting that when you talk about Mayfield and he has this gospel background, that wouldn't necessarily be apparent from what he ended up doing as a solo artist and what he ended up morphing to. But if you think about gospel, I mean, gospel is about acknowledging the bad and transcending the bad into hope and perseverance, character, hope, all of those things. And so I think that really defines Mayfield's work throughout it, that he doesn't look away from the condition of the black community and of ghetto life. He acknowledges it, and he's pretty gritty in his depictions, even in the Impressions period. But there's always this hope, I mean, obviously one of the songs we're going to cover, Keep On Pushing.
Yeah.
There was always this positivity, or this inherent positivity, or this inherent, it's going to be all right. I mean, even his greatest work, Superfly, there's some of that in there that through this, that this might be kind of bad and it's not worth celebrating, but there's still love, there's still hope, there's still something that maybe there's a life force that gets us through. So the gospel and then also the doo-wop, which because doo-wop is an outgrowth of church music as well.
Right.
And so combining those two as his initial influences makes a lot of sense. And so Mayfield definitely is as musical and as inspired as it gets from his upbringing. And you got to remember, he's also a Chicago guy, too. He's not Detroit. He's not New York. He's Chicago. And you got to remember, Chicago, we covered the first golden age of rock a long time ago, two plus years ago now. Yeah. And that was really kind of defined by a migration from Mississippi to Chicago of not just black working class folks, but also of the music, where
Yeah.
blues morphed into rock and roll. And so, so he's growing up in that first generation of resettled folks from the South in Chicago. And so, music is permeating there. So he's in a rich spot to be richly versed
Yeah.
in all kinds of music. So there's a lot going on with Mr. Mayfield, and
Yeah.
more power to him because of it.
Yeah, and we'll get into it later, but like just the socio-political content in his lyrics, he was way ahead of the curve of
Yeah.
like other bands and artists in the R&B soul field. And that'll be explicitly clear once we get into the music and the songs. So let's start. 10 essential impressions songs. Of course, we'll go in a chronological order because that's the way we do it here in the Curmudgeon Rock Report. The first track, It's All Right from 1963. The Impressions hit their purple patch running with their biggest hit yet. The smooth soul sound and swinging R&B style of Sam Cooke is a big influence on this track. And I do mean smooth. Smooth and swaying rhythm, smooth lead vocals by Mayfield, smooth guitar accents. This is as endearing and as sugary pop as old R&B gets, and it's reflected in the charts. Number 1 on the R&B chart and number 4 on the pop chart. Big hit. Chris?
Yeah, great song, and proof, and the first proof of several here that at his best, Mayfield could out Smokey Robinson
Yeah.
in terms of this kind of song. And I'm a little bit embarrassed to admit, I didn't realize that this was a Mayfield song. I knew it from a cover that Huey Lewis and the News did in the mid '80s. It was the B-side to "The Power of Love," which is the ubiquitous song from Back to the Future. Uh, so it's kind of funny that it turns out that Curtis Mayfield wrote. No wonder that's such a great song, because Curtis Mayfield wrote it. How about that?
Yeah. Another great song, Keep On Pushing from 1964. Mayfield was brilliant at, in his lyrics, disguising a positive social message, in this case, perseverance in the face of societal and cultural barriers, in what can otherwise be interpreted as a love song. The odd waltz time rhythm was highly unusual at the time, but the listener isn't alienated as the three vocalists combine for a creamy, vivacious vocal melody. Great, tasteful horn arrangement, and that complements the vocalist as well. Number 1 in the R&B chart, number 10 in the pop chart. The Impressions were cooking at this point. Chris?
Yeah, great harmony, and one of the first proofs of the power of Mr. Mayfield's falsetto.
Yeah.
And in pushing forward the verses, and and it also showed that he just had a gift for, this being the 1964. That's the heart of the civil rights movement, and
Right.
he had a gift for writing civil rights movement anthems with under people's noses, really.
Right, in disguise, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean,
and
Motown was still doing boy and girl love songs and party tracks, and here was Mayfield, like at the same time, like really crossing over into something completely different that people like Marvin Gaye wouldn't reach until like 6 years later.
yeah, and I've read that "Keep on Pushing" was one of the songs that the Freedom Riders like to sing on the buses.
Wow.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. All right. Next, People Get Ready from 1965. While this technically isn't the Impressions' biggest hit, it is arguably their signature song and the one they are most identified with. Quite simply, it's one of the most moving and sublime singles of the 20th century. Again, Mayfield produces a song that can be interpreted in different ways. On one hand, it's a straight up gospel song with the Impressions imploring everyone to get on the train and move on up to heaven and thank the Lord. On the other hand, the train is also a metaphor for the civil rights movement. Mayfield isn't asking everyone. Well, basically, he is asking everyone, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, you name it, to come together for social and racial equality. Here we get the birth of Curtis Mayfield as the prophet of peace and the high priest of positivity. Number 3 in the R&B chart, number 14 in the pop chart. It's a crime that it didn't hit higher in either chart. Chris?
Yeah, neat song. It should be mentioned that it finished number 24 on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs.
There you go.
ever written. So it's way up there, and it's a neat trick in the sense that I hear a straight gospel song, but yeah,
Yeah.
you can relate it to
Yeah.
the unification that was required of the civil
Yeah.
rights fighters and
Right.
to transcend the Jim Crow and to get over what was going on in the South and to get those victories that happened in 64 and 65. So there you go.
All right, next, Can't Satisfy from 1966. This song was not a hit, only number 12 on the R&B chart and missing the top 40 of the pop chart, but it really should have been a hit. It possesses that sprightly, snappy Motown rhythm, and the arrangements are immaculately crafted with their call and response horn section and oddly haunting xylophone in the background.
Mhm.
Chris?
Yeah, and the thing about this song is, and it came out about the same time, it kind of mirrors This Old Heart of Mine by the Isley Brothers.
Yeah.
That they're very, very, very similar. Which, and again,
Yeah.
because they came out so close together, that was probably a fluke that
Yeah.
they were kind of dabbling in the same notes. And obviously, that became a big hit for the Isley Brothers.
Yeah.
So in a way, the song did sort of become a hit. Yeah. Or a version of this song sort of became a hit.
Well,
But yeah,
yeah, the
good,
next
good,
one by the
good, good,
Impressions
good
was a hit.
song. Good
Oh,
song.
sorry.
Good. No, I'm sorry. Good song with a nifty rhythm and a
All
nifty
right.
melody.
All right. The next song was a hit. We're a Winner from 1967. Funk starts to appear in the Impressions sonic brew, albeit in an understated way that doesn't overwhelm the message of the song. And the message is one of unambiguous black pride and black power. Yet, what made the Impressions and Mayfield in particular popular among white audiences was the fact that Mayfield's Black Pride message wasn't confrontational. It was positive, it was inclusive, most importantly, and emotionally stirring, as if the advancement of African Americans is one that all of society can take part in. It also has a heavy ass drum track and some stinging guitar work by Mayfield. It was a big hit too, going to number 1 on the R&B chart and number 14 on the pop chart. Chris?
Yeah, this hints at the solo grandeur to come from Mayfield. This song has a real sway to it that Mayfield kind of continued to refine and perfect as a solo artist. And so basically you could say in that groove, there's an origin story of sort of what came after this Impressions period.
Right.
And yeah, there's some really neat guitar playing on this and some really subtle strings and horns mixed in there. So this is of all these songs, this is the most maximal yet. And
Yeah.
was not the most maximal of the songs on this list, but it was the most maximal yet.
Right. All right, next. Now we're getting to the late 60s. Now, first, this next song, They Don't Know from 1968. By 68, Mayfield had started his own record label, Curtom Records, and secured major label distribution for the Impressions and himself, especially his soon to come solo career. The Impressions album of that year, This Is My Country, is probably their finest studio album because some of the album tracks are every bit as great and as powerful as the group's best singles. On this one, Mayfield boldly addresses the climate of the African American community in America in the immediate aftermath of Martin Luther King's assassination. He defiantly asserts that they meaning those viewing Black Americans from the outside, don't know that every brother is a leader. Murdering one man, no matter how important, will not stop the advancements and the forward motion of the Black community. Claiming that only love can make the world be free can seem like a naive hippie-ish statement, but in Mayfield's hands and voice, the sentiment comes with a power and an urgency that is truly moving. And oh yeah, the track itself grooves like a monster with its pulsating bass, cracking drums, and stabbing horns. Talk about maximal. Chris?
Yeah, and yeah, definitely maximal. And this song's not hippy dippy though. It's positive, and it's optimistic in how it aims for peace. But
Yeah.
it's also got some angst to it. I mean, the quote, we've lost another leader. How much more can we endure? So it really, kind of captures the moment and the gravity of the moment, that he doesn't look away from the pain. That's, like I said, he had this real gift for looking and experiencing the pain
Right.
while encouraging transcendence from it.
Right.
So yeah, so it's so definitely not hippy dippy and definitely not pie in the sky. It's grounded
Yeah.
in reality, which was a
Yeah.
real gift that that Mayfield had.
Right. Next, Gone Away from 1968, same album. Mayfield was growing by leaps and bounds as a songwriter at this point, and with this other album track from This Is My Country, he shows that his ballads are every bit as stirring as his social message songs. This is a widescreen, sweeping ballad of epic proportions. John Lennon is the only other artist I can think of who had the genius ability to imbue lyrics that would be maudlin and trite in any other songwriter's hands with a power and an emotion that resonates universally. The bridge on this track is just sublime, too. Chris?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And, like, the lyric "Child, I want you back." Yeah, you would think it would be trite, but he lays on the horns really thick, and it is
Yeah,
a romantic lost ballad. And one thing about he did a lot of romantic lost ballads or a lot of
sure.
romantic heartbreak ballads, but it's almost never his fault. Yep, you
Yeah.
notice that this is about the least angry of these as we go along. Like if in his solo records, or like the later solo records that we're going to cover, there's several of these, and they're pretty nasty actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, he gave him real pathos, but it was almost never his fault.
Well, later on in his solo, you'll hear it in his solo stuff. He takes a little more responsibility for the emotional distress in the relationships. Early on, no. Early on, he's still a guy in his 20s. Oh, girl done me wrong kind of crap. But it shifts a
Mhm.
little bit as he gets older in the 1970s, if you listen to the albums. I mean,
Yeah.
anyway. Okay, next. Fool for You from 1968. It was only a moderate hit, going to number 3 on the R&B chart and number 22 on the pop chart. But the lead single from This Is My Country has a rhythm that rolls like thunder and a horn arrangement that hits you in the chest. Ostensibly a song about still loving a woman who continually takes advantage of and abuses him, Mayfield could easily be singing about why he still loves a country that continually denigrates and brings down his people. Again, the dual-edged sword and the ambiguity in the lyrics. Chris?
Yeah, this is pure blues inflected soul pop, and it's interesting. It reminds me, and it really kind of evokes girl group music, and not
Yeah.
only that, but I could picture Diana Ross or Dusty Springfield, or
Yeah.
or like a real female front woman, like booming voice type of female singer singing this
Yeah.
song. So it has that feel to it, like very girl groupy.
Right, definitely. All right, next. Choice of Colors from 1969. Mayfield's last year with the Impressions doesn't mean he was holding back when it came to quality material. The lilting, majestic grace of Choice of Colors has some of the most complex and challenging lyrics in his catalog, with or without the Impressions. On this one, Mayfield addresses what he sees as the self-loathing and borderline self-destructive tendencies of America's black community, especially in the inner cities. When he sings, "If you had a choice of colors, which one would you choose, my brothers?" It cuts deeper than his usual positive messaging and social commentary. No white singer could have gotten away with this, and no other black singer had the courage to attempt it. At the time, by comparison, Marvin Gaye was still singing "I Heard It Through the Grapevine." The fact that a
Yep.
track this lyrically bold was any kind of hit, number 1 on the R&B chart, number 21 on the pop chart, is pretty startling. Chris?
I mean, it is post "I'm Black and I'm Proud"
Yeah,
by James Brown,
right,
so it's not
right,
like it came out of nowhere,
right.
but yeah, still pretty audacious. Actually, really audacious as hell for him
Yeah,
to call out black folks and their sort of their racial resentments
yeah,
and cop outs. I mean
right.
that's essentially what he's saying is that
Yeah,
that y'all are copping out by playing the race card. So
yeah,
kind of challenges black attitudes about not just race but urban culture in general.
right.
About poverty and about societal harmony and about violence and things like that. So yeah, audacious as hell.
Yeah, really. It's one of his boldest songs, really. I mean, this is a song that people should be talking about more often. All right, and the next one, the last one, My Deceiving Heart from 1969. This single was essentially a flop, but it deserved a much better fate. The guitar intro, the bombastic horns, the marching rhythm, the slightly bluesy guitar fill. This is a gospel song at heart. Lyrically, though, Mayfield turns inward with a truly pained, tortured vocal performance, taking all the here he takes all the blame. He's not
Yeah.
blaming the woman here, taking all the blame for a ruined romantic relationship. Or is he talking about his own relationship with God? Chris?
Yeah, there is ambiguity there. And yeah, this is like one of the rare instances where he's oh woe is me over a breakup. That
Yeah.
he's basically indicting himself for his own nature. And it's interesting because here the gospel influences kind of shine through in the piano. The piano is very gospel-y, and so it kind of kicks off what ends up becoming like a maximal R&B ballad, but it's got its heart, and it's rooted in gospel, so that makes
Yeah.
it kind of a neat song.
Yeah. All right. Now we reach the heart of this episode, and this is the legendary solo album run that Curtis Mayfield had from 1970 until the mid 1970s. This is what made him a legend, and this is what, in my opinion and in Chris's opinion, should still to this day, and unfortunately not quite as much, especially if you read music media, that should have them on the same pedestal as the Marvin Gayes and the Wonders and the Princes and the Michael Jacksons of the world, and the James Browns and the George Clintons. But unfortunately, I guess, I don't know, something got lost. But we're here to make you remember the legendary album run of the late great Curtis Mayfield. And we'll start with his first album, Curtis, from 1970. Mayfield's solo debut starts off with one of the most epic and provocative album opening statements of all time, with the apocalyptic, "Don't worry, if there's a hell below, we're all going to go," with a fierce rhythm section augmented by congas and a stirring dramatic string section. This is all the socio-political messaging of his time, with the impressions let loose with a menace and a fury he wasn't known for, and had not been known before, and would rarely show afterward. This is angry Curtis. The come down after the 1960s and the prospect of harder times to come seemed to weigh heavily on Mayfield, but it didn't dull his positivity. As the rousing, widescreen orchestral funk of Move On Up shows, Mayfield is resilient in his belief and message that trudging onward and upward is the only choice in a world where the cards are stacked against you. The triumphant rush of Miss Black America sees Mayfield pushing back against the ethnic beauty standards of the time that Black women faced, and in some ways still face now. The lush beauty of Makings of You shows how his penchant for touching ballads was never far away from his toolkit, while the moving album finale, Give It Up, shows a surprising fondness for the orchestral pop of Burt Bacharach, of all people.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, the heart of the album is in the socio-political songs, such as the ones I mentioned before, as well as the sweeping, almost symphonic sweep of Other Side of Town, Mayfield's first-person account of turmoil and poverty in urban inner cities. And with We the People Who Are Darker Than Blue, Mayfield displays his gift for positioning the struggle for racial equality as one that all humanity must bear. Touching, moving, inspirational, powerful, cerebral, intelligent songs that are immaculately produced and expertly played with his new crack studio band. Curtis is a flawless masterpiece of sophisticated orchestral R&B and soul. Chris?
Yeah, I can't really add much more to that, other than how exciting it must have been to hear this album back in 1970 after him coming off the Impressions. That there's definitely an exuberance that he's test driving his freedom, and he's breaking out of convention. Like a song like "Don't Worry If There's a Hell Below," which is just this almost unhinged 8-minute long, damn near funk song. And then also, with We the People Who Are Darker Than Blue, which again is it's not quite as bold as Choice of Colors, but is pretty darn close to that. It's a really poignant call to action for people of color. And but it's a weird song in the sense it's got this terrific swirl of strings and horns, but then it's got the middle section, which is got this kick-ass Afro-Caribbean inspired thing going on. And so it's a three movement song, and in the middle he goes to the Afro-Caribbean, and so again he's not living in a box on Curtis, and pretty much for at least 3 more years wasn't operating in any kind of box. For the next several albums, he was boxless, and that made him pretty darn exciting.
Yeah. His second album, Roots, from 1971. One could be tricked into thinking that Roots is just Curtis Part 2, but that would be wrong. There's so much on this album that makes it stand out as an all-time classic, and in fact, perhaps one of the most underrated albums of all time. While the previous album had an explosive album opener, this record's album opener, Get Down, shares a similar super groovy bass line, but possesses a more low-down, simmering funk that seeps into your skin rather than pricks it. The blissful, jubilant We Got to Have Peace is, yet again, a shining example of Mayfield's genius for taking sentiment that would be trite and corny in a lesser artist's hands and elevating it to a universal, resonant truth. One big difference between Roots and Curtis is how lean, mean, and groovy his backing band is, pointing the way to the funk masterpiece of the next album, and you can hear it in the hypnotic, subterranean funk sweat of Underground, one of Mayfield's grittiest moments, and possessing one of his weirdest guitar solos. And with Now You're Gone, Mayfield takes his increasingly funky band to a place few artists ever dared to then or now go, an unabashed funk ballad with stabbing strings that don't sound out of place next to the strident groove and the supple horn section. Yet another perfect album from one of pop music's, not just R&B, soul, or funk, one of pop music's greatest album streaks to open a career or a solo career. Chris?
Yeah, I absolutely agreed. And Underground is not just weird for the guitar solo; it's a weird lyrical concept. The whole thing is, what if we all lived underground after ecological destruction and we were all black? And so it's kind of a weird concept. But the bass lines throughout it, I mean, are just incredible. I mean, Get Down. Underground, Beautiful Brother of Mine. Has a delectable fuzz bass to it. And then Now You're Gone, which is really kind of a blues song, but it's like a slow bluesy burn. But even the fuzz bass shows up on that as well. And so, this is another one of these, a perfect 7-song record. No filler. It's just like you said, it's leaner and it's meaner, and the band is really figuring out how to ride Curtis's grooves at that point. They're finding the space,
right?
And he's getting a little bit more. Like I said, the strings and the horns are there, and it's not quite as symphonic as the next couple records, but it's pretty damn good, really damn good.
All right, next. Superfly from 1972. We've already discussed the momentous impact of Mayfield's Superfly soundtrack album in the 1972 episode of our second Golden Age of Rock series. But such is the power, depth, heft, and overall cultural importance of this record that it bears being praised again. One of the very few soundtracks to actually outgross the film it accompanied. It's also a landmark in R&B and soul that stands alongside, if not surpasses, some of the best work of contemporaries such as Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Al Green, George Clinton, etc. While the movie itself one of the most famous blaxploitation films of all time, was controversial for its glorification of violence and the drug trade, Mayfield was astute enough to go the opposite way by commenting on the tragedy of life in poor African American neighborhoods in urban areas. He shined a light on the poverty and drug abuse that were ravaging these communities at the time without being overly judgmental, with the unspoken implication being that this is what happens when a marginalized, disenfranchised minority is not looked after and ignored by society at large. Mayfield pulls off a lyrical balancing act here, being critical of the lifestyle choices the poorer half of his people make, while also being understanding of where they're coming from. Whereas in his 1971 masterpiece album, What's Going On, Marvin Gaye gives us a macro, big picture look at the problems of the world, taking a general account of sociology, politics, and racial inequality. Mayfield, on the other hand, it gives us a micro perspective, giving us intimate stories from the streets that hammer those same points home, but in a clearer, sharper focus, leaving just enough space in his words for the listener to draw their own conclusions. In my opinion, this is a big part of what makes Mayfield's approach more powerful and more impactful. And of course, there's the music. It's mostly stripped of the string arrangements that accompanied his previous solo albums, and the sound is decidedly funkier and leaner, with all-time classics such as Push Your Man, Freddy's Dead, and the title track. It is a masterpiece among masterpieces. Chris?
Yeah, it really is. And dare I say that, we a lot of rock nerd, geek iconoclasts like to talk about all-time great 3 and 4 album streaks in rock history. I would say that Curtis, Roots, and Superfly deserves to be mentioned in the same breath as the Stones and the Beatles and Neil Young and CCR and bands
Zeppelin.
like that. Yeah, Led Zeppelin. I mean, you're talking. This is one of the great streaks of all time, and this is how it culminates. This has got to be like one of the tensest, most taut albums of funk music, of black music of all time, and it's done purposefully. And like you said, this is kind of Curtis's comment that the guy you're up there celebrating for beating the man has also got half his neighborhood hooked on heroin and got his buddy killed. By the feds. So it's like, why the hell are you, why are you celebrating this guy? And so there's almost this almost kind of resigned shrug about it. And so it's not really rage. It's kind of a lamentation. And so in some ways it's a very emotional record because of that. It's understanding and empathetic, but also it's mournful. Like some of the the instrumental towards the end of the record, "Think," is this really great little almost dirge that precedes the title track, that precedes Superfly, and it goes into that familiar bass line. And so he takes those moments, and so it's just running counter to the film really inspires him to bring out his best music. And right, he doesn't use the strings quite as much, but it's not really a minimal record. I mean, there's percussions, there's bass, there's all kinds of, you do get some horns, you do get that, and so it sounds like it's like it probably isn't, but it sounds like it's 30 pieces. It's almost orchestral. It's like rock. It's like funk and rock orchestra. Orchestral music. It's sensational. And I've always liked the song "Give It to Me" too. I mean, in terms of Mayfield. I mean, I know that Shaft was released before Superfly, but Superfly kind of defined the blaxploitation soundtrack afterwards. You always had a chase theme, which this has. You always had a love theme, which is "Give It to Me." Or you always had a couple of love themes, and then you always had kind of the character's entrance music, which I guess on this one would be Little Child Running Wild. So he kind of invented the template for all of the blaxploitation films that came after it, and so extraordinary accomplishment by Mayfield.
Yeah. And it still sounds great today. Like
Yeah,
anyone
it
who says
does.
otherwise is just has no taste in music. All
Yeah.
right, next. Back to the World from 1973. It was futile for Mayfield to try and top Superfly. So Mayfield didn't try. Instead, he gives us a top-notch scorcher of a record that consolidates every aspect of his genius and talent. The classic single Future Shock sees the man going deeper into funk, showing he could get just as down and dirty as James Brown, George Clinton, or Sly Stone. Right On for the Darkness sees Mayfield bring back the gorgeous string section that he could muster at will, solidifying his role as the pioneer of orchestral funk. Can't Say Nothing rides a groove that comes awfully close to the New Orleans funk of groups like the Meters, while Future Song, in parentheses, Love a Good Woman, Love a Good Man, is delectable, irresistible R&B pop. It suffers only in comparison to the monolith records that came before it. Judged on its own, it's a classic in of itself. Chris?
Yeah, I agree. This is a very, very strong record, and just thematically, the opening song, "Back to the World," the title track is
Yeah.
basically about a Vietnam vet reintegrating into society and about the shame that they
Right.
all felt and about the shaming of the Vietnam
Yeah.
veterans being reincorporated. And then Future Shock is just sort of is sort of a warning, uh, a warning shot that,
Yeah.
like the chorus, quote, "We got to stop all men from messing up the land. When won't we understand? This is our last and only chance. Everybody, it's a future shock." So the idea
By
is,
the environment, yeah.
yeah, and so you're talking about, the choices we make now,
Right.
will affect everything down the road. So we have to kind of knock it off, if we're going to make it. And then Future Song is just a really, really neat concept, and it's hard to believe he pulled it off. But basically, it's every other line switches gender. It's like, get yourself a good woman, get yourself a good man, and just, she's who you need, he's who you need, and to switch back and forth like that. So it's this ultimate song, where it talks about the father, or it talks, there's a religious reference in there that makes it clear that he's
Yeah.
talking about conventional marriage, that this is the roles of men and women being there for each other in a conventional biblical marriage.
Yeah.
And so that's really, really neat. Here I want to mention, by the way, that we're covering these 8 studio records, or his first 8 studio records, from the 70s. But after Superfly, he became an in-demand soundtrack writer and producer
Yes.
for other
Yes.
artists. And I do want to mention that he did 4 of these,
He
between
he he wrote and produced entire soundtrack records for Gladys Knight and the Pips, Aretha Franklin, and I'm forgetting one other.
the Staple Singers,
Staple Singers.
and also
Dude,
Mavis Staples solo.
yeah.
So the four albums, the 4 movies are Claudine from 1974, Sparkle from 1976, which I believe has, Giving Him Something He Can Feel on it, which,
Yeah.
was later covered by En Vogue in the 90s. Let's Do It Again, which is the Staple Singers, and then A Piece of the Action. Those latter two, Let's Do It Again and A Piece of the Action. Bill Cosby and Sidney Poitier did a series of really cheesy, comedy movie, where basically they're the only 2 guys in the film that don't swear and don't shoot people. It was kind of family friendly blaxploitation, starring
Right.
Bill Cosby and Sidney Poitier, and Mayfield did the soundtrack to 2 of those records.
Yeah. All
There's
right.
two
Well, we're
of two of
focusing.
those movies.
Yeah,
So
right. Well, we're
anyway,
focusing on the
I
yeah,
did
yeah,
want to
good
mention
point.
that.
Yeah, good point. All right, so we're focusing on the solo stuff though. Next album, Sweet Exorcist from 1974. Mayfield continues his hot streak with the very underrated, that's a word that's come up a lot in this episode, Sweet Exorcist. Martial arts films from China were all the rage during this time, especially after the death of Bruce Lee the previous year. So you can forgive Mayfield for wanting to jump on the bandwagon with a song called Kung Fu. But you know what? The track drips with a tense, menacing funk that manages to be trancy. Mid-tempo album opener Ain't Got Time is 5 minutes long, but makes you wish Mayfield would have stretched it out to a 10-minute funk jam. Power to the People is more of the luscious R&B pop Mayfield had perfected to this point, while To Be Invisible is perhaps the sweetest ballad ever written about having an existential crisis. Yet another cracker in the great man's great discography. Chris?
Yeah, I kind of disagree on this one. This one's a weird album. There's a lot of, I mean, at least it starts off like really downcast and almost moribund. The title track with its stuff about depression and almost suicidality, and there's the lyric, "My mama born me in the ghetto. There was no mattress for my head, but no, she couldn't call me Jesus. I wasn't white enough," she said.
I love that lyric.
Yeah.
It's powerful shit.
Yeah. Exactly. And and actually, I think that's from Kung Fu. Okay. So anyway,
Yeah.
I kind of contradicted my point here. But there's two great songs on this album: "Power to the People" and "Kung Fu." I like Kung Fu because it's so silly that it's almost like a movie title. It's almost like a blaxploitation title track for a character for a movie that never got made. That Kung Fu is the action hero. He's the ghetto brother. You couldn't call me Jesus, so they called me Kung Fu. That's pretty delightful. And then "Power to the People" has got it's a nice, sweet, anthemic hopefulness to it. But the rest of it is just kind of moribund, and the falsetto is starting to thin a little bit, starting with this
getting
record.
older. Yeah.
And so it doesn't really work in that sense. It doesn't have the verve that the other records on this list have. It's by far the worst album on this list, in my opinion.
Well, all right. Next one, "Got to Find a Way" it's also from 1974. Maybe this was a weak year for him. This album, for me, represents a blip in his album hot streak. He's starting to recycle his usual musical hallmarks while also sounding tired, as noticed by several of the song's sluggish tempos. But even a lesser Mayfield album can carry some absolute gems, such as the monster funk jam Mother's Son, where Mayfield lets it rip on guitar. "Cannot Find a Way" brings back the master's patented orchestral funk, and more strikingly, in the lyrics, you start to hear a desperation and a sinking pessimism that not only starts to mark his work from here on, but also reflects the mood of Black America at large. It's a rather mediocre album that is saved by these two sterling tracks. Chris?
Yeah, "Mother's Son" and "Cannot Find a Way." Those are the saving graces for this album. This album's definitely more energetic than Sweet Exorcist, but he does sound a little bit tired. Again, it's a step up from Sweet Exorcist. It's a step up from moribund and kind of disjointed to at least jointed and a little bit more rousing, but inconsistent. But I like "Mother's Son" just because he said nice funk jam. "Cannot Find a Way," great lyrical. It would not have been out of place on Superfly in terms of its thematic pessimimism and realism. And then "Ain't No Love Lost" is actually pretty good too at the end of the record. I mean, this is another one of these. It's not quite misogynistic, but I guess you could call it poetically nasty as a send off. He's pretty pissed about the dissolution of this romance, and so there you go.
Yeah. Next, the ironically titled "There's No Place Like America Today" from 1975. That sinking pessimism I mentioned when discussing the previous album really shows up on this one, but in an odd way, it kind of revitalized Mayfield because this is really one of his very best albums, despite its poor commercial showing on the charts. Here we get solemn Curtis, if you will. Album opener Billy Jack is swampy, hypnotic funk that carries an unmistakable foreboding. When Seasons Change floats along with an irresistible gospel-tinged lilt and beautifully segues into the starry-eyed, sweet ballad So in Love. The darkness comes back, though, with the spacey funk of Hard Times and the rather ambiguous sentiment, if not downright irony, of the rolling mid-tempo groove of Love to the People. This album doesn't hit you over the head like his early solo work does, but it does seep into your skin as a bit of a small masterpiece of slow-burning funk. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely agree. This is the strongest album since Superfly. It does seep into you. The more you listen to it, the more it seeps into your soul. And yeah, there is a pessimism and there is a soberness to it. But there's two songs in the middle of it that kind of give it a positivity or kind of give it a transcendence. There's So in Love, which it's a happy poppy peppy kind of song. Fantastic horn arrangement and fantastic background vocals, female background vocals. But then the weirdest song on it and the coolest song for me is Jesus, which is totally unironic and it's worship music. It's kind of in the same vein as the stuff that Al Green would do a couple years later on the Bell album, but it's unapologetically looking to Jesus as being the model that basically it's kind of a weird song in the sense that we praise Jesus and then at the end he ain't no hustler, he ain't out there drinking, Jesus, we can count on Jesus. And so he's contrasting Jesus with a wino at the end of it, which is it's weird, but it's cool, and it has an upbeatness to it, and so I can dig that. But yeah, this album it's not as showy as some of the other records, and it's a little bit more minimal. And like I said, it's probably like his least strings and horns, hitting you over the head with those things. It's probably it doesn't necessarily count as minimal, but it's not nearly as swollen as some of his other albums, and so which is what makes it kind of cool. And I know that I read somewhere that NME did a 500 greatest albums list in 2013, and this placed somewhere in the middle of it, like 260,
interesting,
or something like that. So it placed on an NME greatest albums of all time list in 2013. Go figure.
Yeah, interesting. And then we conclude with Give, Get, Take, and Have from 1976. The final album of Mayfield's unbelievable album streak really doesn't get enough credit for how layered and textured it is. Opener, In Your Arms Again, parentheses, Shake It, blends some exquisite fluid guitar work with some of the best horn arrangements he had ever concocted at that time. While the lyrics on This Love Is Sweet are quite lightweight, Mayfield gets away with it due to the utter joyousness in the chorus and the beautiful background singing. Only You, Babe is such an obviously commercial, rousingly catchy love song that it makes you wonder how it wasn't a hit. A lot of pop music in the mid-1970s is characterized by some seriously sleazy saxophones, yet it sounds perfect within the context of a Curtis Mayfield composition such as soul music, with a rhythm that comes very close to the burgeoning disco sound of the time. This is the last Mayfield album where strong songwriting is consistently wedded to alluringly dense arrangements and production. Chris?
Yeah, absolutely agree. This is kind of the end of the beginning or the beginning of the end, I guess you can choose one of those that, the beginning of the record, like In Your Arms Again is a great song, groovy as hell, great little guitar lick to it. This Love Is Sweet is a beautiful little ballad. Party Night, which is disco Mayfield, it actually works. He would go on to do some disco that didn't work, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But then soul music, like you said, that's more disco, and it just kind of works. And you can tell that at this point he's starting to become a little bit more domestically content
Right.
because gone, starting to disappear are the socially conscious, socio-political commentary songs. There's only one on this record, and it ends the record called "Mr. Welfare Man," which is the
Mm.
happiest, about the happiest sounding song about being on welfare imaginable. It's like, oh boy, I'm on welfare, yeah. Uh, it's so, but so he's starting to become more content and starting to sort of fall into love songs. He's not even there aren't really any breakup ballads on there. He's not angry at women or angry at himself. He's actually
Yeah.
kind of in love, and this is his happy in love record, and so it works. And so this is the outer edge of the very good to great Mayfield.
On this episode, we gave serious love to the career, the legend, and the genius of Curtis Mayfield. For the next episode, we're going to tackle the biggest and saddest what if story in the history of hip hop, the story of Big L. Hailing from the Harlem area of New York City, Big L possessed one of the sharpest, most inventive flows rap music ever saw, and his subtly sophisticated lyrics painted pictures of inner city dread that rivaled those of Nas. His stories of crime and life and life in the streets were as vivid and startling as any of those by Raymond Chandler. Even in a time in the 1990s when gangster rap was prominent, his music was still considered too raw for hip-hop radio and MTV. His style and approach were then co-opted by Jay-Z, who watered it down and rode it to international stardom. And then Big L's life, just when it seemed his career was about to turn a corner, was cut short in a gang-style execution. Join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report delves into the life and career of a man who should have been a worldwide hip-hop superstar in Big L, hip-hop's lost genius. Okay, so, well, of course, Mayfield didn't just stop making music in the late 1970s. He trudged on for a little bit onward, and, there's some tragedy along the way. So, unfortunately, nothing to do with his music, but Chris, tell us about Curtis Mayfield from 1977 onward. Let's wrap up the story.
I shall. The second half of Curtis Mayfield's career is largely the sound of a once great artist losing his edge and falling victim to a craving for maintained relevance. But its end was clearly the sound of triumph. To explain, Give, Get, Take, and Have, the last album we just discussed, hinted at movement by Curtis Mayfield towards a more conventional and contemporary R&B sound with a hint of disco mixed in. It's still a strong album, and one that manages to tack on one song that regards urban political issues, Mr. Welfare Man. But that proved to be the last socioeconomic dance for Mayfield. Between 1977 and 1982, Mayfield released a series of albums that found him guilty of copying the conventions of the day. He was still ultra competent, as a genius on his level would have been apt to do, but the inspiration thinned out in much the same manner as his famed falsetto. It kind of all went to shit, frankly. Some of this output was just painful. This includes the lame attempt at going full-on disco 1978's cheesy "Do It All Night." That album is divided into two halves. The first three songs are all like 7 minute plus, just almost like robotic, disco dance songs with Mayfield kind of getting lost in it to the point where you wonder if he lost the point by the time he got to the end of the songs. And then the last three songs are kind of ballady, but really just like yuck. And just not very not inspired at all. Anyway, 1982's "Love in the Place" is also mostly a dud that sounds oddly more like J.T. Thomas era Kool and the Gang than anything resembling old school Mayfield. Mayfield's most successful album of this period was 1979's "Heartbeat," which reached number 42 on the Billboard 200 Albums chart. "Heartbeat," it turned out, was Mayfield's last real blast of chart relevance, driven as it was by more insipid disco. Now, his best album from this era was something of a flop, 1980's "Something to Believe In," which includes two actual orthodox old-school R&B songs and an updated recording of "It's All Right," So, any album that has It's All Right on it can't be terrible. But otherwise, the rest of it is flat. Maybe Mayfield was happy at home and content to raise his kids, but on record, he was largely going through the motions. By the early 1980s, Mayfield was done as a commercially viable artist, and he seemed to accept that fate. In 1982, he effectively shut down the operations of Curtom Records and moved with his family to Atlanta, Georgia, where he remained for the rest of his life. He released only 4 albums after 1982, though he still toured regularly. It was while he was on tour that tragedy befell Mayfield. This is how the Los Angeles Times reported on the horrendous accident that rendered Mayfield a quadriplegic. Quoting now from an August 15th, 1990 story by writer Chuck Phillips. The accident I referred to happened a couple of days earlier on August 13th, 1990. Quote, soul singer Curtis Mayfield is paralyzed from the neck down and remains in serious condition after being hit by a lighting scaffold blown down by a gust of wind during an outdoor concert Monday night in Brooklyn, New York. Mayfield, composer of such classic R&B tunes as People Get Ready and Superfly, was about to begin performing at Wingate Field when a gust of wind dislodged an unstable scaffold of overhead stage lights and sent the tower crashing down on him. The scaffold struck Mayfield from behind and broke his neck, according to Mayfield's son. The 48-year-old veteran soul artist was listed in serious but stable condition on Tuesday at Kings County Hospital, suffering from head and neck injuries. End quote. Mayfield's health would deteriorate slowly over the next decade. This is me talking again. As a result of both complications from the accident and from the effects of diabetes, which he started to really suffer the effects of in his late 40s and 50s. But it turns out this foremost black music genius had one final triumph in him. Somewhat miraculously, he created the 1996 album New World Order with a host of producers. He composed all of the music, and lore has it that he recorded his vocals line by line, in other words, one line at a time, while laying down, a good position evidently for him to better control his breath. The album is a consistently engaging and occasionally poignant run through modern R&B sounds and styles, and Mayfield's vocals are absolutely amazing. Seriously, you'd have no idea that he had suffered any kind of catastrophic injury listening to the album in a vacuum. Unfortunately, Mayfield spent the rest of his life struggling with these health issues, losing a leg to amputation in 1998. He died on December 26, 1999, but not before he gained induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame a second time, this time as a solo artist. The Impressions had been inducted years earlier. So the latter half of his career follows an arc of complacency, tragedy, and triumph. It's ultimately a noteworthy chapter in the man's history. Arturo, what are your thoughts on this period of Mayfield's life and career?
Well, I mean, hey, at this point, he was just, living legend, Curtis Mayfield, right? and
Yeah.
and I mean, yeah, I mean, those late 70s records and onward all kind of sucked. But it really doesn't matter when he had albums this good. Not just the stuff he did with the Impressions, plus, like we just said, his legendary solo album run from 70 to 76. He can be, you can excuse and forgive him, for trying to sell out and get all disco-y and get all and trying to sound like early 80s R&B. I mean, he wasn't alone, A lot of his contemporaries kind of sold out as well. I mean, have you ever heard Stevie Wonder's stuff from the 1980s?
Oh,
Good God.
part-time lover.
Good Lord. Yeah, that's no better than what Curtis Mayfield was doing,
Yep.
So honestly, like my take on it is, yeah, so what if it sucked? He made such great music all throughout the 1960s and through most of the 1970s. He could have just recorded the sound of his farts for the next 20 years. His place in history would have been secure, at least
Yeah.
in my
Well,
opinion.
but there's a
So
lot of artists you can say that about. They get to like Elton John, like he got
yeah.
to a certain point where he just kind of phoned it in,
Yeah.
and
Well, around the same time Mayfield started phoning it in.
yeah. Well, there you go. So Arturo, now let's discuss Mayfield's big picture legacy and his place in the pantheon of 20th century pop music. We've established that he's got quite a strong legacy, or at least should have a strong legacy. Like I said, he's a little bit of a lost artist here in the 2020s, which is way too bad. You're almost. I have hope that like some kid will, use Freddy's Dead in a TikTok video and it'll take off.
Yeah, we need
That's
that.
kind of the way you revive old music these days. But
Right.
anyway, talk to me a little bit about his legacy and how we should contextualize Mayfield.
Well, I kind of two things I look at. I hinted at, or more than hinted at it, I mentioned it at the very beginning of this episode. He really bridged the gap between that sweet, sophisticated soul and R&B of the likes of Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder, Aretha Franklin. So you had that, and on the other side, the dirty shit, the driving, dirty, hard funk of James Brown and George Clinton. Mayfield bridged the gap between those two. Okay. And there weren't many artists who did that. And he did it. And he did it expertly well. He did it better. There were a few others who tried. I think Sly Stone did a little bit of that too. I think
Yeah.
Mayfield was even better at it than
Yeah, he
Sly
was.
Stone,
I agree.
in my opinion. He was even better. And Sly Stone would probably tell you that himself. He's still alive. So that's one way I look at it. And another thing is of how ahead of his time Mayfield was with his lyrics, with his socio-political messaging, with his socioeconomic message about poor black people in the inner cities. Remember, this guy was from Chicago. This guy grew up amongst this stuff, within that stuff, and he knew it firsthand. And he put it in the lyrics in his songs with the impressions in the 1960s when most Motown, if not all Motown artists, were still doing love songs and party songs. Right? It didn't
Yeah.
take Marvin Gaye until 1971 with What's Going On to become a quote unquote serious artistic statement artist. Mayfield was already doing that years before.
Yep.
He really was. And he doesn't get credit. He doesn't get enough credit for that he was ahead of the curve over Marvin Gaye was. He was ahead of the curve of where Stevie Wonder was. A lot of that sophisticated, almost orchestral funk, not an orchestral, but classy funk that Stevie Wonder became known for. Mayfield was already doing that. Okay. He was already doing that in the early 70s with those first 2 or 3 records of his. Okay, so he was ahead of the curve in so many ways. Like I said, the funk ballad. He invented the whole idea
Yeah.
of a funk ballad. Who
Yeah,
the hell did that before him?
like Give It to Me is pretty much a funk ballad, right?
Yeah, so he invented subgenres of R&B
Yeah.
music. Okay, he was lyrically ahead of everyone else, and musically he was pushing in areas that no one else was. So I think that is why, and he was surprisingly influential. He influenced a lot of people. He was one of Jimi Hendrix's favorite guitarists and singer-songwriters. I have the book by Charles Cross about Hendrix's his biography of Hendrix. Jimmy idolized Curtis Mayfield. So it was just he was just really an important figure to a lot of people. He was inspirational to the African American community because of his lyrical message, how it never really lost hope, the positivity, but it was also emotion. He straddled the emotionality, if you will, and intellectualism. Okay, and he put it all together. For as brilliant as Stevie Wonder was, he could be a little sentimental and trite. Mayfield was never trite, no matter how gooey his love songs were. They were never trite. Okay. So Mayfield touched and checked so many boxes that it's really sad how he's not seen on as high a level as some of those other big names that I've mentioned before. So that's where I see Mayfield's big picture is just those things, how ahead of the time he was lyrically, doing shit no one else was doing, and just how he bridged that gap between the two styles of R&B and soul and funk music as well.
Yeah. And it's actually kind of shocking that he's not more revered because his styles and his meldings of what he was doing is very close to the spirit of hip hop in some ways. That sort of
Sure.
CNN of the streets kind of deal, and just how funky he got, and I'm surprised that like the bass line from If There's a Hell Below hasn't been sampled by somebody in a major hit. Or the Freddy's Dead, or even Superfly. Well, Superfly has that bass line's been used quite a bit, But other than that, it's surprised that he's not more sampled. It's not surprised. I'm surprised that he's, Donny Hathaway gets a lot more love than Mayfield, and Hathaway was a lightweight compared to Mayfield. He was good, but he was a lightweight compared to Mayfield. So it's kind of strange that Donny Hathaway gets all this love from rappers, but not Mayfield. And so there's a little bit of injustice there, and so damn it, that's what we're aiming to clear up here with this here podcast episode. We want Curtis Mayfield deified. Damn it, get him up on the pedestal.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so we meant it when we say the most underrated artist in music history. We think we made our point.
Yes, we
Join
did.
us for next time. We're going to tackle another underrated artist, and this one's even more tragic, but that comes later.
Well, there you go. And in the meantime, folks, we encourage you, as always, at the end of these episodes, to join our fabulous Curmudgeonly community on Facebook. Kind of a milestone up there this week. We got our first crowdsourced episode idea about doing an episode about all-time great soundtracks.
Yeah.
So from a comment. So that's pretty exciting. We have a crowdsourced idea, folks. Yay. So anyway, if you have any other ideas and if you want to share in the merriment and mirth, go to facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock. We're invite only, but chances are we'll let you in. Otherwise, if you have any disagreements about any of our thoughts about Curtis Mayfield, or if you too see Mayfield as being one of the most underrated artists in history, send us a line at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. We'd love to get fan mail from you. And as we've been doing for more than a year now, we'll be posting a Spotify playlist. We'll be assembling that, and we'll be including a link to that playlist in the episode description for wherever you get your podcasts, whether it's Apple or Amazon or Stitcher or any of the other popular platforms. You'll be able to access that link and listen to all the Mayfield that you can stand. So good stuff, folks.